In 1939, a ship called the St. Louis left Hamburg, Germany, with 930 Jews. These were among the last Jews that were ever able to leave Hitler's Germany. And they left for Havana, Cuba, because of all the countries in the world, only Cuba decided to allow 930 Jews to flee from death and come to their country. And when these 930 Jews arrived in Cuba, they were suddenly told that their passports were invalid and that they would have to go home to Hitler. And there began a drama as these 930 Jews anchored 90 miles off Collins Avenue, where tens of thousands of other Jews enjoy themselves on the beach and at the hotels and at the dog races. And these Jews, these 930 Jews, waited for someone to save them. Jewish leaders and Jewish organizations went to see the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. To the Jew, there was God in Roosevelt, and not necessarily in that order. And when Jewish leaders went to Franklin Roosevelt and asked him to allow 930 Jews to come in, the President said that it couldn't be done because there was a quota. And the German quota was filled, and the Jews would have to go home to Hitler. Now, I know Jewish organizations and Jewish leaders who 20 years later went to Selma, Alabama, and there eagerly and voluntarily broke the law when it was not a question of Jews, when it was not a question of people having to go back to Hitler, when it was a question of civil rights. They went, and they broke the law, and they went to jail. And I know of no Jewish organization and no Jewish leader who in 1939, when it was a question of their own brothers and sisters facing extermination, who decided to do the same, who decided to go to the White House and chain themselves to the gates of the White House in protest so as to arouse the world. 3 years later, when the Second World War broke out, and we suddenly learned that there existed on this earth a place called Auschwitz, a place where every single day, every 24 hours, 12,000 Jews were gassed. When we knew of this, and we knew of it, and let no Jewish organization say that by 1942 and 1943 they did not know of it, because on this earth there are only two people who still claim that at that time they did not know. The Germans there and some Jewish groups here, and they're both liars. We knew of it, and what did we do? Once again, Jewish organizations went to Washington. Once again, they went to Franklin Roosevelt and said, "You can save the Jews of Auschwitz. Bomb the rail lines leading to Auschwitz." Every day, 12,000 Jews had to go in the cattle cars along these railroad lines and go to Auschwitz. And if the rail lines would have been bombed, instead of 2.5 million Jews dying, many, many less would have died. And when Franklin Roosevelt heard this, he said that it could not be done because it was technically not feasible. The same man whose bombers roamed the earth, bombing everything that moved, somehow found it technically unfeasible to bomb the rail lines leading to Auschwitz. And when our Jewish leaders heard this, what did they do? When they heard the president in effect doom 12,000 Jews daily to death, what did they do? They went home. And no one decided to go into the streets of Washington, D.C. by the tens of thousands or by the hundreds of thousands and sit in the streets and say, "We shall not be moved. Arrest us." None of the rabbis and none of the Jewish leaders who in years to come would go to Jackson, Mississippi and go to jail for civil rights. No one decided to go to jail for Jewish lives. We can never, never wipe away this stain. It's on our soul, it's on our hearts, it's on our minds. And the question that we must ask ourselves is why? Why did we not do for ourselves and for our brothers and sisters that which we do for everyone else? Ahavat Yisrael, the love of a Jew for a second Jew. Who so petrified it and who so killed it that we did not do whatever had to be done? The Soviet Jewish question. One more example of the death of Ahavat Yisrael. The Soviet Jewish question is nothing new. It's 54 years old. More than half a century of agony, of national and cultural genocide, a half a century in which we did not do what had to be done. Who can remember a demonstration for Soviet Jewry in the 1920s, or 1930s, or 1940s, or 1950s, indeed until the middle of the 1960s? The fact remains that for 47 years, nearly half a century, we stood by and there was not one single street demonstration for Soviet Jewry. And if tomorrow morning, when they open up the gates of the Soviet Union and say, all Jews who wish to leave, leave, when that day comes, and of the 3 million Soviet Jews, the vast majority remain behind, whose fault will that be? Once again, it will be our fault, because our silence of 50 years allowed the Soviet Union half a century of opportunity to forcibly assimilate the Soviet Jew. We gave the Soviet Union the opportunity of half a century of no Jewish schools and no Jewish language, no Jewish history, no Jewish culture. We gave them the opportunity to effectively tear away from the Soviet Union, in the Soviet Union, from the Jewish people, nearly 3 million of our brothers and sisters. And once again we ask, why? How is it possible that Ahavat Yisrael was killed, was paralyzed? And there are other problems which we preside over and do nothing about, problems in our own country. In this country there are Jewish poor. Many, many Jewish poor. We can find them in Brownsville, and we can find them in the southeast Bronx, and we can find them in the Lower East Side, and in all the pockets of Jewish poverty that exist in every urban area of this country. And who knows of the Jewish poor? And who thinks of them? And who cares? We're too busy fighting the problems and the battles of every other group in the world. But who cares about the fact that there are elderly people and poor people in neighborhoods that are Jews? Who cares about the fact that they live in crime-ridden areas, areas of nightmares of violence? Who thinks of them? Once again, who killed Ahavat Yisrael, the love of a Jew, for a second Jew? The Jewish Defense League was founded on the principle of Ahavat Yisrael. The time has come for a Jewish organization to understand that for the Jew, when there is a crisis, when there is a problem, in the end, for that Jew, there is only one friend. And there is only one person that can turn to him and that can aid him, and that is a second Jew. And we realize that the time has come for a Jewish organization to fight for Jews and for Jewish rights, and to place the priority in its proper perspective. Jewish rights come first for Jews. Ahavat Yisrael, the love of a Jew for a second Jew. More than words, more than lip service. For the only way that we will help Jews is by the self-sacrifice, the willingness to give up of our time, of our efforts, and indeed much more. This is the cardinal principle of JDL. People look at us and they say, violence on behalf of Soviet Jewry is wrong. We sympathize with your aims, but the tactics are wrong. Violence is bad. Violence is always bad. It's reprehensible. It's something that we wish that we would never have to use. But for 50 years, the Soviet Jewish problem was met only with silence and with apathy, indifference, or respectable protest. And the result of that has been a tragedy and almost a decimation of the Soviet Jews. We care. And what we have done is to take the Soviet Jewish problem off the back pages and put it on page 1, where today everyone knows of it. And that has been done by actions that are not respectable. For after 50 years of trying all that has been tried, and all that has been tried and has failed, we must do whatever has to be done to save our brothers and sisters. Violence. Is violence truly an un-Jewish thing? Is violence really bad? Is violence really something that is not allowed by Jewish law? If one wishes to understand what Jewish concepts are, he must go to Jewish sources. And it is Jewish sources which proclaim for us what is right and what is wrong. To turn the other cheek is in the Bible, but not our Bible. If one wants to know what Jewish concepts are, he goes to Jewish sources, the Jewish Bible, the Talmud, the sayings and the thoughts of our rabbis and our teachers. These are Jewish concepts. And if the Talmud tells us, if one comes to slay you, slay him first, certainly this is a Jewish concept. And this is what must motivate us and drive us. And if in the Bible we see case after case, example after example of the way Jewish leaders acted and the violence that they used when there was no other way, we begin to understand what the real Jewish concept is. Once there was a Jew, and his name was Moses. And Moses has come down in Jewish history as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher. And there are few Jews in history that have ever received the appellation of our teacher. And what did he teach us? He taught us the reaction when a Jew was being persecuted. In the Bible, the story is told of Moses, who went out to his people, and he beheld an Egyptian smiting a Jew. And what did he do? What he did not do is, he did not run to form a committee to study the root causes of Egyptian anti-Semitism. He did not run to form a national conference of Egyptians and Jews. What he did, in the words of the Bible, is, Vayachet HaMitzri, and he smote the Egyptian. And we may like this or we may not like it, and that's not relevant. The fact is that this is a Jewish concept. That when a Jew is beaten and persecuted and faces decimation, violence is allowed. And more than that, violence is an obligation if it is the only way. Why is it that we are so upset at violence? And why is it that we did not do what we had to do 30 years ago, and in all these years for Soviet Jewry? And why is it that we do not stand up in strident protest against the fact that there are Jewish poor in this country who cannot receive and who do not receive from government what other groups get? Why is it that we are so wedded to respectability? The answer is because we sit and we fear and we contemplate and we worry over what will the non-Jew think of us. We who are so insecure, we who are so frightened, we who sit and contemplate daily each and every act on the basis of not whether it is right or wrong, but what will the non-Jew think of us, and will it cause anti-Semitism? The Jewish Defense League is committed to a second principle, Hadar, Jewish pride. Pride in being Jewish. And Jewish pride consists of many things. And one of those things is the knowledge that the Jew will never win the love of the world and will never win the love of the non-Jew until he first wins their respect. Love cannot exist without respect. And respect cannot be gotten until the Jew has self-respect. Until he decides to stand up for his rights by whatever means is necessary. The non-Jew has very little problems with violence. He understands that when he is hit, he hits back. This is normal, this is natural. The Jew is different. He intellectualizes. If he is hit, he ponders and he thinks, maybe I deserved it. And this is why. Because he is insecure and because he is so frightened, we are foisted upon the world an image of the Jew as someone who does not hit back, an image of the Jew who does not do for his own cause what all other normal people do for their causes. We understand that it is time to stop worrying about the world's sympathy. For we understand full well how we get the sympathy of the world. 2 years ago, the State of Israel sent its commandos to Beirut airport in Lebanon to make Havdalah over 13 Arab airplanes. And that was a serious mistake. For on that night, the State of Israel lost the sympathy of the world, which it had gained with such great difficulty 1 week earlier at Athens airport, when a Jew was killed. And after the State of Israel sent its troops to violate international law, it was condemned. It was condemned by the UN and by the Vatican and by the superpowers. And it lost the sympathy of the world. And from this we have a great lesson for those who are obsessed with a neurotic need for the world's sympathy. Here is how to gain sympathy. If a Jew is killed, you will get sympathy. And if 2 Jews are killed, you will get more sympathy. And if 6 million Jews are killed, you will get sympathy in plaques and monuments. And we say that if the price for plaques and monuments and world sympathy is Kaddish and Yortzeit and Yizkor and 6 million Jews, let the world keep its sympathy. We neither want it nor need it. We have no interest in it. We prefer to live and be condemned. We prefer to survive without the love of the world. This is the beginning of Jewish pride. The beginning of an understanding that if hit, we will hit back. And how simple it is for people that have no problems to pontificate about nonviolence. How easy it is for Jews that do not suffer in the Soviet Union to stand here and say, let us not use violence. How simple it is for people who live in wealthy suburbs not to feel the pain of Jews of Brownsville and stand and say, let us not take law into our own hands. Jewish pride means not caring what the world thinks and not worrying about whether it is respectable, but whether the action will help Jews. Jewish pride consists of other things. Jewish pride consists of a pride in Jewish heritage and background, and a realization that Jewish is beautiful, and that for a Jew to be a Jew is what life is all about. The tragedy of the alienation of the young Jew, the tragedy of assimilation, intermarriage of the young Jew who has no particular pride in being Jewish and no great interest in being Jewish. The great tragedy of our times, that if there were no anti-Semitism in this country, we would still be faced with a potential destruction of the Jewish people through assimilation. Jewish pride doesn't exist among vast millions of American Jews. And the fault does not lie with them, but in those who made them. What is the education of the young Jew? Of what does it consist? The young Jew, taken by his mother at the age of 10 or 11, to a Hebrew school, a religious school, not to be made into a good Jew. That is not the purpose of these schools or these synagogues or these temples. He is taken there so that in 2 or 3 years he will reach that great day when he will make his local caterer rich and happy. Competitive bankruptcy for his parents, but the achievement of the proper social status, the bar mitzvah, that is the goal of the American Jew, not Judaism, not heritage, not spirit. And what happens? The young Jew is taken to the school and he sits bored. Perhaps he is fortunate enough every so often to meet a teacher or a rabbi who sits with him and gives him some substance, and he will speak to him, and who will tell him, Yankala. And of course there are no more Jewish children in America named Yankala. We have gone on to bigger and better things. Scott. The American Jewish lifestyle. Scott. You know that Jews don't eat bacon. And this is a revelation to little Scott, who that very morning. But young children are good and decent, sincere, and if the rabbi says something, he goes home and he tells his parents, we can't have bacon tomorrow morning. And thus begins the death of this young Jew. As his parents take him and seat him and say, Scott, we're not sending you there for that. And this young Jew understands. Full well he understands what has happened. The dichotomy between what he was taught in school and what is being practiced in his home. The fraud, the sham, the hypocrisy of what he considers to be Judaism. This is the beginning of alienation, assimilation, and the death of any Jewish spirit and feeling in the young Jew. How can there be Jewish pride? Is it any wonder that young Jews march for Fidel and Che and ho, 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 that these are Jewish heroes on campus? Is there any doubt that this should happen? When the young Jew has never heard of Jewish heroes, when the young Jew has never heard of a Jewish national liberation movement, when he's never heard of the Jewish resistance in Palestine, of the Irgun and the Sternus and Haganah, of Jews who themselves fought back, of Jews who threw bombs at the British and who shot bullets at these colonialists, imperialists. How shall he hear of them and of Jewish heroes like Dov Gruner, a Jewish member of the Irgun who was hanged by the British? How shall he know of these people and these groups when he has never heard of them in his home or in his synagogue or in his school? There can be no Jewish love, and there can be no feelings for Jews if there is no Jewish pride. And JDL is committed to instilling Jewish pride in the young Jew. We may not have as many members as other Jewish groups, and we never will. But one thing that we have done is instill in young Jews this Jewish pride, which makes them go with us into the streets and do for Jews what their parents did not do and what their grandparents did not do. And these are young Jews who never will have to face their children and be asked, what did you do? And not be able to answer. Ahavat Yisrael, love of Jews, Hadar Yisrael, Jewish pride. This is what is instilled in members of JDL. We have it in our power to save tens of thousands of young Jews and to bring them back to being Jewish. We have it. We have the key because we do not give them anything. We take from them. We demand of them their time and their efforts, and we give them a cause, and we take from them the sacrifice needed for that cause. And they listen, and they understand. And they do what has to be done. This is the beginning of the redemption of the Jew in this country. We have gone about changing the Jewish image. If we are hit, we hit back. There is not a new Jew, but rather a resurrection of the old Jew. Because the Jew who lives in Israel today, and the member of JDL who marches in our times, these are not new Jews. These are old Jews. These are the Jews who once upon a time, when there was a Jewish homeland, marched in this very same way, and who fought in this very same way. And the new Jew came into being in exile, born of fear and insecurity, and the ghettos. This was the new Jew. This is the Jew of which Bialik spoke at the turn of the century, following the massacres at Kishinev. And he spoke of the Jews who, during that pogrom, hid under couches and under beds as their wives and as their parents and as their children were slaughtered. Hid and did nothing. These are the Jews of whom Bialik spoke with such anger and shame, and he said, these are the descendants of the Maccabees. And when he said, there is tragedy and there is shame, and only God knows which of the two is greater. This is the Jew that we are burying. And we are resurrecting the old Jew. The Jew who was not afraid to do what had to be done. On Chanukah, when we honor the Maccabim, the Maccabees, and all Jews honor them, and when we ask our children to emulate the Maccabees, let us bear in mind who these people were. A minority of people who did not fight the Greeks with petitions, but who used violence and who used the sword. And we ask our children now to emulate them. And that's good. And we take great pride in those who fell at Masada. And we take our children there and we say with great pride, these were Jewish heroes. And they too used violence on behalf of a Jewish cause. The Jew must do what has to be done. And the Jew must understand that one does not achieve great goals without sacrifice. And in the words of Jabotinsky, one does not conquer the top of the mountain unless there is a grave on the slope. Sacrifice. And sacrifice is not an easy thing. But surely those who are not capable of sacrificing should at least have the decency to be quiet. When those who do make that sacrifice. I want to finish with a discussion of one other problem that faces not the Jews of the Soviet Union, and not just the Jews of Brownsville, but the Jews of this country. There are 6 million Jews in this country. That number, once again, 6 million Jews, who live in a land which today is not as golden as it was yesterday, and which tomorrow, I fear, will be even less golden than it is today. And the question arises, what is the future of the Jews of this country? What does the future hold for us? And I fear that that future is a dark one. There are those who say that that which happened elsewhere cannot happen here. And yet that is precisely what was said by Jews of another country, which was a golden country for Jews. That's exactly what the Jews of Germany said in the 1920s. Living in a land which gave them freedom, living in a land that saw a Jewish foreign minister, living in a land that saw Jews live in wealth and with power and prestige, dominating the arts and the cultures and the newspapers and commerce, and so convinced in their own minds that it could not happen there because, after all, what was Germany, Tsarist Russia? And yet it happened. And the world turned upside down, and the Golden Land became a nightmare. And that which happened there could happen here, and indeed is beginning to happen here. We live in a land that is split and divided by violence. A land that is riven by frustration. Frustration and fear and anger over a war that has been lost. And already the legend is being woven, just as it was in 1919 and 1920 in Germany, of a stab in the back at home. By who? By Jews. It is a legend that is false, but which is believed. This is a land that is divided by social passions, by anger and gaps between young and old, rich and poor, black and white. Racial strife in this country will yet bring us to a terrible, terrible day. And who will suffer? The Jew. The Jew. The eternal scapegoat. Economic problems have loomed. Serious problems. Problems that go to the very heart of the political and economic system. Unemployment rises. Trade deficits grow. Balance of payments show unbelievable problems. And as unemployment grows, and as millions of people are out of work, they fall prey to extremist groups on the right and left. And once again, the eternal scapegoat remains the Jew. And who can say how this will end? Who can know what people who are desperate will do? The people in this country are no better or worse than those of Germany. Empty stomachs push people into actions that they would otherwise not do. Frustration, fear, anger, tension, and bitterness create people that we do not recognize. And what is the answer? The answer for the Jew is to realize that the presumption that this country will be different than all other countries is one that must be proven. For the presumption is quite the opposite. Based upon what we have seen, the presumption is that this country will not be different. And those who say that it is have the burden of proof to rebut it. For the Jew, in the end, there is one solution. For the Jew, in the end, there is one land where he is assured of living as a Jew, among his own people, and as a majority. And for the Jew, the final solution is the state of Israel. The time has come for us not to be afraid of speaking openly. The time has come, if we indeed love Jews, to push forward on a program along these lines, to tell Jews, while there is yet time, not only to leave, but to leave with honor and with their property. For who knows? Who knows what tomorrow will bring, and surely who knows what the day after that will bring. For the Jew, there must be an understanding that he cannot escape from what he is, and from what his people are, and from what his culture is. We are what we are. We are Jews. And that means love of Jews. That means Jewish pride. And that means a willingness to do for ourselves what other people are willing to do for themselves. The rabbis tell us that on the day that the Almighty wanted to give the Torah to the Jewish people, all the mighty mountains came and pleaded with God for the privilege of receiving the Torah. Each one wanted the honor of having the Torah given on its peak. And the rabbis say that God said, no, I have a small mountain. And his name is Sinai, and I'm going to give the Torah there. Why? Because the rabbis teach us God wanted the Jew to learn a lesson of modesty, that the Jew must be humble. This was the lesson of Sinai. And there was a great rabbi, the Ger Rebbe, a Hasidic rabbi, a great scholar, and a very clever man, who upon studying this portion said, if God really wanted to teach the Jew to be humble, he really could have done much better. He could have given the Torah to the Jews in a valley. And really, there is nothing more humble than a valley. And he said, there was a reason that God did not give the Torah in a valley, but on a mountain. Because God wanted to teach the Jews a second lesson. And that second lesson is just as important as the first. God wanted to teach the Jew that to be too humble and to allow himself to be stepped upon is also not the Jewish way. And this is the lesson that JDL attempts to teach to Jews. The lesson of Jewish survival by peace if possible, and if not, by whatever means is necessary. The Jew must learn the lesson of his bitter history. And that lesson is that in the end, we can look only to ourselves. And the Jewish future lies with Jewish love and Jewish pride and survival by all Jews in the land of Israel.